Welcome to Hidden History, Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. I am good. Why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest today? Let's get right into
Sure.
it.
I'll be glad to. I met Robert Burnham when he came through Oak Ridge with a tour, one of the tours that I was leading, Stephen Ambrose tours, and we were talking. I think it was that evening when we met at the hotel, and we were just getting to know one another, talking about what we were doing. I was talking about the newspaper columns I write and those standard kinds of things that generally we authors who get together talk about. And Robert mentioned he had a book that he thought I might be interested in, and sure enough, he did. I bought the book. The book is The Armageddon Secret, and I have enjoyed it so much so that I contacted him and asked him if he would come on Hidden Histories and Stories from the Secret City, if he would do that and let us talk about his book. So, Robert, that's not a good introduction of you. So, if you want to tell them a little more about yourself, I'd appreciate it. And then we'll get into the program that you want to do. Okay?
Well, thank you very much, Ray, and thank you for inviting me onto this show. And just a couple of lines about my background. I'm a forensic engineer by my current business card. That means that I go out and I investigate accidents and machinery problems and so forth that might involve automobiles or machinery and manufacturing plants and so forth. And that's what I've been doing for my years after I left the automotive industry for 40 some years of being a program manager and program manager of the S Series truck line for Ford and so forth. So after that, then I went into this consulting world, and I've got about 12 cases right now that I'm working on around the United States for various clients. I live in Traverse City, Michigan, half the year, and in beautiful Central Florida. I go from my theory is when it gets cold, I go to hot. When it gets hot, I go to cold. So that's the way I live life these days, and it's a good way to live.
Hey,
So
Keith, I have to interrupt you, Robert, just a minute. Keith, don't tell him about Tennessee,
All
okay?
right.
You know, and Robert, in Tennessee, we don't have to move.
I know, yeah, you get them all there
We just we
in little
just
spurts.
you just say just wait a couple of hours.
Yeah, it'll change.
Yeah, yeah,
But seriously, we don't have the extremes.
Mm-mm.
Now, I've been to Michigan. I know what can happen up there in the wintertime,
yeah.
but I've been to Florida. I know what can happen down there. But enough said about Tennessee. Enough, we've got a lot of Californians that are coming to Tennessee,
Yeah, Florida too.
so we don't need any more people coming right now.
Well, I hope to see you in Tennessee
Oh,
in May
yeah.
because I'll be coming from Florida to Traverse City, Michigan, on the edge of Lake Michigan there for the summer, and I'll be stopping by and buying you dinner. And if Keith's anywhere around, likewise.
Oh, good. We appreciate that.
I
All
look
right.
forward to that.
Okay, and I interrupted you. Anything more you want to say about yourself before we introduce your book?
No, I think we could just go on to talk about the book trailer that you're about to show here in a moment, and then from that we'll go into about maybe half an hour's worth of slides that I have to show you and give you some more background on how the book came to be and
Yep.
and why I think it's important.
Okay, very good. Let me connect to the trailer now, and there it is, and optimize for video, and share it, and I hope you're seeing it. Keith, you see it?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
The Armageddon Secret is a book of historical fiction based on actual events. Author Robert Burnham weaves together actual characters and events with fiction to create a story of how Germany's great lead in the race for the atomic bomb was destroyed and civilization preserved. The time is 1938, 3 years before America entered the Second World War, and the most critical battle of the war is soon to be fought, not on a battlefield, but inside a Berlin laboratory. nation is controlled by a madman who will stop at nothing to rule the world. There's no doubt that this madman would unleash a superweapon upon the earth without hesitation if it would make his victory against civilization possible. Germany has lost its collective mind, hypnotized by the lies and hatred of Hitler. The ruthless persecution of Jews hits a crescendo with a murderous night called Kristallnacht. At the Berlin laboratory of Nobel Prize-winning scientist Otto Hahn, he's made a disturbing discovery. Splitting the atom in an explosive burst could yield millions of times the explosive power of TNT. The German army has gotten wind of this possible world-changing discovery. And so has the anti-Nazi German underground. They call themselves Black Orchestra and are headed by the German army's leader, General Ludwig Beck, recently fired by Hitler for questioning the dictator's plans for world conquest. But the Germans aren't standing still. They start an atomic bomb project team, and it's years ahead of America. The underground must act. They cannot let Hitler possess this weapon, to reduce all other kinds of warfare to irrelevancy. But no scientist in Germany can be trusted to help them understand atomic physics and destroy the threat. The Americans must be contacted to help. Black Orchestra finds a man who can make the connection, and he has plenty of personal reasons to fight the Nazis. Soon, he meets the widow of a Black Orchestra member murdered by the Gestapo. They will risk everything to stop the German atomic bomb. They need a plan, a strong dose of courage, and a lot of luck. If they fail, it means the end of civilization. But something happened to throw Hitler's scientists off the track. Was it simply a botched laboratory test? Or did someone, inside or outside the German scientific community, pull off a massive deception? Based on actual events, the Armageddon secret gives an explanation of what might have taken place, since historical record is silent on what really happened. Buy today from Amazon or your local bookseller. Available in hardcover, softcover, or ebook.
All right, there we have the trailer introducing the book, The Armageddon Secret. Okay, Robert, are you ready for your presentation now?
Yeah, I just say one thing. The book, there was mention in there about the importance of what's talking about here. And when I was in New York City, was meeting with the executives at Simon & Schuster about the book, they suggested the greatest battle of World War II was fought inside a laboratory as being a tagline, logline for the book. And so I believe I discovered a very important story to tell, something that's going to make readers stop and think about how close we came to losing civilization as we know it today. Maybe I thought about it a lot, and I thought, should I write a straight up story, straight up nonfiction story about this, or should I do it through a fictional account based on actual events and historical figures? And I figured out that the best way to do it would be the latter, and to show it in a sense of a dramatic setting, as, for example, Ken Follett did in The Eye of the Needle. He presented a way that the D-Day thing could have happened, but it did in a fictional sense. So that was somewhat of my inspiration. So yeah, now I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Let me get the slides up for us. Well, hold on just a minute.
When did the book come out?
It came out in just about 1 year ago,
Okay.
Keith, and it's in Barnes and Noble stores in Florida, Michigan, some other places, and of course it's on Amazon and Walmart and Books A Million and those kinds of websites as well. So it can be ordered that way.
Sure.
There we go. Terrific.
Okay, I think I've got it up now. So if you want to go ahead and start, I'll change them as you need it.
Okay, well, next slide already.
All right.
That shows that story. Could Hitler have gotten his hands on this bomb before America? Well, we know all about their technical advancements in Germany, the world's first ballistic missiles, first jet fighter planes. Well, somewhere in my younger days, I'd read that at the end of the war, they were tinkering with atomic research at a low level. But as I came upon a few books, and this book here, I don't know if you can still see me in the picture here, but this book was a 1960s book called The Manhattan Project. And in that book, they told me a little bit about the German aspects of this thing. I was walking through the University of Michigan, my alma mater, through the library there one day as an undergraduate, and I see a book on a table called The German Atomic Bomb. And I grabbed the book up, sat down, started reading it, checked it out, read it back at my dorm eventually. And I was shocked to find out that the Germans had really a great head start. That was back in my undergraduate days, so that's been a while. And I've been thinking about this as I went through my career. And eventually I had the opportunity, after calming down with all of the business things in my life, to actually tackle it and get going on it. So once I learned about that, then I was ready to start writing and building upon what I'd been learning. The story of atomic energy begins in ancient Greece 2,300 years ago. Democritus, fella here, suggested that everything that they saw or touched is made up of tiny particles that nobody could see. A few years later, Aristotle said that all the thousands of things on Earth are combined from certain basic elemental forms. Next slide. So where does atomic energy come from? There are many that came to realize later on it wasn't just earth, air, wind, and fire, that there are actually many discrete elements like oxygen, carbon, and uranium. Next slide. Well, then we have these fellows called the alchemists that in post-Roman times, alchemists tried to find combinations of common elements that would make precious gold for them and their rulers. None of these attempts worked, but they kept on trying for centuries. Next slide. We evolved eventually into the modern view of atoms, developed in the late 1800s. Very smart people such as Max Planck and Ernest Rutherford realized that atoms were not just tiny billiard balls. They were actually composed of many particles. And it seems like every week we learn about another particle that the physicists have figured out that's way inside the neutrons or the protons. But if this nucleus there that we see in the middle, that cluster, is split, then energy can be released out into the world. Next slide. And this gentleman that we all recognize changed the world. Einstein's theories began to show that destroying completely the atoms could convert them directly into energy. The amount of energy within a single atom is so huge that if it's all converted to energy, it's powerful enough to pop a grain of sand into the air, one atom. And speaking of extreme power from little things, splitting all the atoms in a match head would give enough energy off to melt the ice in a glacier. Next slide. Then came the breakthrough, December of 1938 in Berlin-Dahlem. For over 30 years, different scientists in different countries were trying to find a way to destroy the matter in the center of an atom to release its energy. They were all unsuccessful. These 30 years began after Einstein's wonder year of 1905, when he was published his fantastic treatise on relativity. And but then in the last weeks of 1938, in a Berlin laboratory, something remarkable happened. Dr. Otto Hahn pasted strips of pure natural uranium inside the center core of a paraffin wax cake. You can see it in that picture. I'll go back one slide, Ray. There you go. In that picture there that you see right there in the lower right, you see a work table, and on the right side of that work table, up in the corner, it looks like he's got an angel food cake sitting back there. Dr. Hahn pasted strips of purest uranium on the inside of that toroid, and he bombarded the outside for 24 hours with protons through the wax. I stood there at the Munich's Museum of Technology and looked at this original setup, Dr. Hahn, 1938 December. Now the next slide. This is an interesting cartoon from 1947. General Electric put out a comic book about atomic energy. When Dr. Hahn and his associate Fritz Strassmann used chemical analysis to figure out what was there after they bombarded the uranium with protons from the radioactive source, they were shocked to find out that most of the uranium has actually disappeared. So in the picture up above there in the cartoon, you can see that the U-238 splits into elements 137 and element 83, and it's fission and energy is given off. His associate there, that took place over 24 hours, though. His longtime associate, Lise Meitner, who had been kicked out of Germany because she was Jewish, she was living in Denmark, and she and Hahn were communicating. She correctly interpreted that the uranium atoms had actually split and lots of energy was being released. But for the energy to come out instantly and make an explosion, as opposed to trickling out over hours, it must be transmuted in the way that the alchemists hoped that it could be done, and from uranium make a new element that would be able to instantly split. Next slide. When that happens, do we have a fizzle and a spurt, or do we have a huge explosion? Natural uranium won't explode. As I said a moment ago, it takes something new, a new unstable element. But to make this new element, natural uranium must be bombarded with slow neutrons that drift along almost, as opposed to flying almost at the speed of light. When they do that, they attach onto the nucleus and transmute it into plutonium, the dream of the alchemists. And I said in the slide here, too bad they didn't use H.G. Wells' name for it, Carolinum, but Pluto is a Roman god of death, and that's pretty appropriate. Next slide. To make these neutrons drift along, they needed something that's called a moderator, something that will slow them down as they drift toward the center of the nucleus of the atom. Deuterium is a substance that's a little different from normal hydrogen. It has actually an additional neutron, making it twice as heavy as normal hydrogen. So when you combine that with oxygen, you get a little bit different product called heavy water. Voila! And the heavy water looks like regular water. However, you can't grow plants in it. You can't drink it. It doesn't work like regular water. It's different enough that it will work in this application of slowing down these neutrons. Until the 1940s, the only place in the world where heavy water was produced was in this picture in the upper right, the Vermont plant in Norway. They started making fertilizer there in 1934, the Norwegians did, and they didn't know what to do with this byproduct that was this heavy water. So they basically threw most of it out. However, conveniently, the Germans conquered Norway in the spring of 1940, and there they had a supply. However, it only produced about 8 pounds of heavy water per day, and they needed about 5 tons to convert enough natural uranium to plutonium to make a bomb. Next slide. And the world had changed a lot since Hitler came to power in 1933. The only reason that he got to be Chancellor of Germany, he was never elected to any office. A lot of people think he was voted in as the Führer or the dictator, but he wasn't. He got into power by a backroom parliamentary deal. But he was successful in consolidating power. By 1938, Jews were being murdered in the streets, and the army was preparing for war. So we have a nasty confluence of historical events, meaning atomic energy coming together and Hitler grasping tremendous control and targeting the rest of the world, especially Jews. Next slide. A confluence of events indeed. H.G. Wells foresaw the coming of battle tanks, aircraft, the sexual revolution, and in 1914, he predicted the atomic bomb. He said in his book, The World Set Free, the last war erupts in Europe, rapidly escalating from bloody trench warfare into a world-consuming atomic holocaust. That's written in 1914. The blurb says, the Paris is engulfed by an atomic maelstrom. Berlin is an ever-flaming crater. The cold waters of the North Sea roar past Dutch dikes and sweep across the Low Countries. Moscow, Chicago, Tokyo, London, and hundreds of other cities become radioactive wastelands. Published in 1914. Next slide. And again, here we are, latter part of 1938, 3 years before America's Manhattan Project had started. The Germans completed what they called the virus house in order to throw off the curious. Nobody wants to go in and around viruses. German Atomic Research Center, and you can see the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute on the right in the background there, and then this big building in the foreground, the virus house. Next slide. And this German project starts to get underway. They're pulling together scientists, and if it can't be stopped, civilization dies. We may be defeated, he said in 1934, but if we are, we will drag a world with us, a world in flames. Next slide. Well, what happened? Obviously, we're sitting here with Ray and with Keith and with anyone else watching. We're speaking English. We're not dead. There was no German atomic bomb. What happened? Did the German scientists deliberately torpedo the atom bomb program? Was Hitler distracted by the war and didn't really care about it? Did the German scientists make a genuine mistake? Key scientific minds had already fled Germany. Maybe that had something to do with it. Didn't have the right people. And did anti-Nazis within Germany conspire to derail a project by deceiving German scientists? What was the answer? So what about these people that fled Germany? The German atomic bomb project in April 1939 had an interesting composition of people. In the 1930s, they lost all these people that are listed on the left. Leo Szilard, an important loss. Einstein, you would think be an important loss, but he really didn't do much for the Manhattan Project. We had a list of other people, including Lise Meitner, who I've already mentioned, Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, and others there that left in the 1930s. Who stayed, though? This is important. Werner Heisenberg, who is the father, if you will, of quantum theory. We hear about quantum theory in practically every program of science fiction or whatever, and it's becoming a major thing. He was still there. Otto Hahn, whom we mentioned a couple of times, Nobel Prize winner. James Franck, also Nobel Prize winner. Hans Geiger, the Geiger counter was named after him. Fritz Strassmann, partner of Otto Hahn. Von Ardenne, a nobleman who was also a scientist, a very smart guy. Walter Bonte, we'll talk about him a little bit later, also won a Nobel Prize. Kurt Diebner, who plays an important role in the Armageddon secret, and Eric Schumann. So brain drain was not their problem necessarily. Next slide. Ludwig Beck. General Beck was the top man on the German general staff. In September of 1938, right before all this was starting to happen, Beck had a major disagreement with Hitler over Hitler's plan to invade and conquer other European nations. The general was extremely popular among the leadership of the German armed forces. So Hitler decided not to have him executed, but rather let him go his own way. But almost immediately, Beck started a group of fighters determined to rid the world of Hitler. He brought together a variety of dedicated people from various parts of the military and the governmental people, even some politicians, and other people he deemed would be helpful in this gigantic effort to displace Hitler and the Nazis. The Gestapo eventually got wind of their existence, but decided they were no actual threat and began calling them the Black Orchestra. The Beck's group adopted them, that name as their own name. They were sworn to stop Hitler regardless of the cost to them. Dick Rhodes, the author of The Making of the Atomic Bomb, you can see this, you see my well-worn copy here of the book. It's pretty beat up, and I have a second copy. Dick is my friend, and he on page 345 of his book, he said, Walter Bonte, who was the guy who was testing the Armageddon secret material, the secret material that I've called the Armageddon secret, he concluded that graphite would absorb too many neutrons to work to sustain a chain reaction and to make plutonium. But Dick said nothing in the record indicates that the overestimate was deliberate. So in other words, nothing says that Walter Bonte did this intentionally. Nobody really knows. Dick wrote to me in an email. He said, Robert, you are tilling fertile soil and speculating about how the Germans fell out of the correct pathway to find the Armageddon secret, because nobody really knows. 2 years later, Enrico Fermi and Szilard in America made the correct graphite calculation, and 33 months later, America exploded the world's first plutonium bomb at the Trinity test on July 16th, 1945. That much is history. Next slide. Ken Follett, I mentioned the eye of the needle a moment ago. He said, what follows in the foreword to his book, he said, what follows is fiction. Still, one thinks something like this must have happened. So that's the premise, as I mentioned before, of the Armageddon secret. All warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu, 500 BC. Next slide. My task was to use this background of atomic energy development, make it into an enjoyable and informative work of historical fiction, contemplating this fellow named Alex Drake, an American correspondent assigned to Berlin in the late 1940s, receiving a summons to join the anti-Nazi underground. Obviously, he's flabbergasted by this, very suspicious. But it turns out that Black Orchestra has stumbled upon the Virus House project, but they need America's scientific ingenuity to stop the Virus House. He decides very reluctantly to join in with them, become their bridge back to American scientists, and they struggle together as he becomes part of their group. They struggle against the Gestapo traitors and their own inner demons, of which they have many, and their struggle to stop the Germans from learning the Armageddon secret. And how did this book happen? When I was in grade school, I read this book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Later in life, I corresponded with Mr. William L. Shirer about my idea to write about this epoch in the development of the atomic bomb. He encouraged me to write it. I still have the letter from him. But I was busy with automotive engineering career. I had little time to write. But I continued to be shocked that almost nobody knew that the Germans were first to split the atom. I would mention that to friends, and what? That's crazy. It can't be. And that they were years ahead of the Manhattan Project, which produced the American atomic bomb. They'd spent billions on the rocket programs. They had 10,000 people working on the V1s and the V2s. And by September 1944, they were bombarding London with V2 ballistic missiles that mainly landed in the fields around London or in the English Channel. I knew that those Germans had spent billions on this rocket program, but I didn't know that the V2's program there at Peenemünde on the Baltic Sea cost about $50 billion in 2022 dollars, 50% more than the entire cost of the Manhattan Project, but about 38 billion in 2022 dollars. So what if they'd have taken those resources and put that kind of effort into a nuclear Manhattan Project of their own 3 years before America even got started? Next slide. So as I was able to find time and learn the craft, I read the books that I've already mentioned here, and I began my research visits, went to Munich, Berlin 2 times, went to London, New York City, Paris, the Madame Curie's Institut du Radium in Paris. There's a chapter set there. And I wrote a 500-page nonfiction account of the era. But I didn't like it, and it was somewhat redundant, not really, but there's a lot of other books written about the beginnings of atomic research and so forth. So I started to think more, again, at that point, as I mentioned, about not writing fiction. Ken Follett, the style of Eye of the Needle book about this. From 2000 to the last 20 years, I've made more visits to Munich, London, New York, Oak Ridge. I visited the Museum of Science and Energy in its earlier incarnation there in about 2015, and was surprised at how it changed. But I read 20 more books and created an early draft of the novel, became online friends with Richard Rhodes, Lance Morrow from Time Magazine and the Wall Street Journal, and others who encouraged me and gave me a lot of help. So the nonfiction book became historical fiction. I still was confused about why the Germans didn't get there, because nobody really knows. I said that the historical record is largely silent regarding this miraculous break, which we caught as human beings. So I wanted to tell a story worthy of discussion and make it entertaining, not dry and scholarly. And I began to learn that writing is difficult work. Some of you have written books already, and you know what I'm talking about. Hemingway said, there's nothing to writing. All you have to do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. And Thomas Mann said, a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people. So I developed a detailed outline, and then I started to work on the unseen labors here. Editorial revisions. I utilized 2 editors plus an editor from the publisher. I had 2 complete rewrites of the manuscript and a delay of several years to continue on to get the manuscript to the place where it is today, which I'm quite proud of. But you can see in this picture here, an editor would send me back this kind of a markup, as you see on the right side there, long 4 of them here in this, 3 of them in this page. So 3 of them, sometimes 5 of them per page, times 300 pages. You've got easily 1,000 changes to make when you get one of these things back from the editor. Long time and a lot of work. Next page then. Then I call it Unseen Laborers Part 2, mock-ups of maps and the editing of the Simon & Schuster illustrators' work. I created the mock-up on the left over there through compiling a lot of information, figuring out what would be informative to the reader in terms of where they can picture things happening and reference where people are moving from one place to another. There's 2 maps in there side by side. And so the Simon & Schuster people would send me back a picture like in the middle there, a graphic like that, and I'd mark it up, send it back to them, back and forth over months. So that's one of the things that one goes through there. Next page then. And another unseen labor. There's several illustrations in the book, not illustrations, but rather some illustrations and also some pictures. Copyrights. Every single chapter starts out with a quote that's hopefully, I hope, is relevant to the content of the book. And to get those quotes, I had to contact, for example, the Hebrew University of Tel Aviv to obtain permission to use the quotes from Albert Einstein that I used in the book, which they own. I got permission from places such as the Museum of the City of New York to use photos. This is an example. I got the photo from them on the left, and then I had a person talented in that kind of work to transform it into the picture on the right, which then had to be approved by the Museum of the City of New York. And there goes again, another unseen labor. Next slide, Ray. And finally published. And December 2021, it went on sale. And I've had a number of book signings around the Eastern United States, and as I mentioned, it's found in various Barnes and Noble booksellers, and it's quite a feeling to walk into a library or a bookstore and see my own book on the shelf there, and particularly my hometown in Northville, Michigan, to walk in there and where I sat and worked for many Saturdays on this manuscript, to look up now and be able to see the book on the shelf. It's quite a feeling that sometimes is hard to believe. Next slide. So what's real? In one of the chapters, spanning on 1 or 2 chapters there, Jörg Elser tried to kill Hitler in 1939, which I attributed to him being co-opted by the Black Orchestra folks. This actually happened, but I'm not sure about him being tied in with the underground. But the CIA believed that Hitler set up the attack himself to become a near martyr. And oddly enough, Elser was arrested, but never tried, and then he was shot in the last weeks of the war, even though that was 5, 6 years later. Very strange that they wouldn't have done something with him unless he were somehow tied into something different there. The University of Heidelberg experiments on the graphite moderator actually happened with the results similar to what happened described in the book. Drs. Einstein and Szilard actually wrote a letter to President Roosevelt in 1939 urging America to work on the atomic bomb, but that was sat in a dead letter box. After Roosevelt looked at it, he passed it on and they ignored it for several years, amazingly. Late start for America. Actual members or affiliates of Black Orchestra included General Hans Oster. He was one of their spy masters. Something like J. Edgar Hoover would have been involved in the German underground, in the American underground of Nazis working against our government. That's so strange. Von Donenhey, Karl Godelier, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who I had to call Reverend Bourne in the book, and Admiral William Canaris, who was actually also in the hierarchy of the German spy apparatus. And of course, Germany never got the ultimate weapon. Why was that important? Very important. Operation Olympic Land for October 1945. 500,000 Americans predicted to be killed or wounded. Atomic bombs saved them. My father included in that group. He was over there in the Pacific Theater, and I wouldn't be talking to you here very likely if they'd have had to storm the beaches at on the main islands. More than 200,000 Japanese perished in the two atomic bombs. Some died of cancer and burns later. But remember that earlier in 1945, the German incendiary bomb attack of Tokyo, 100,000 people were killed and 1 million injured in one night of incendiary attacks. President Truman's decision, don't use this new weapon and sacrifice 500,000 Americans, or drop it and save our soldiers' lives. Imagine if American people would have done to him if they learned that he had a wonder weapon to end the war, but he failed to use it, and all their young men would have died. And so the bombs were dropped, but never since. MAD, mutually assured destruction strategy, has stopped another world war for 78 years and counting. But there are about 20,000 nuclear warheads scattered around the world today, and the smallest ones are at least 80 times larger and more powerful than the first bombs of 1945. Most of these warheads are hydrogen bombs today, 1,000 times as powerful as atom bombs. So, the Ukraine and the right side over there, Putin rattles his Satan II nuclear saber. Taiwan, what's happening there? Terror attacks, was somebody going to slip one into the United States through one of our borders, or even an accident. Next slide. I think we're almost to the last one here. 33 months after America approved the atomic bomb could be made, with H.G. Wells' concept of a new element, the first plutonium atom bomb was tested in the New Mexico desert. And I was there in October of this year, there at the site of the Trinity test. I believe, Ray, you're going there soon, if you haven't been there already.
I have been there already, and I do plan another trip.
Absolutely. And the third bomb was, the first one was the one we're talking about in the desert. Second one was the uranium bomb in Hiroshima. And then this one, made with plutonium, ended the World War II. Next slide. And so Harry S. Truman, this concludes my book. His quote was, "I realize the tragic significance of the atomic bomb. Thank God it has come to us instead of to our enemies." And that's what this book is all about. Next slide. So I would ask you, if you're kind enough to pick up a book and give it a read, that you would give it a review on Amazon. You don't need to purchase the book on Amazon. You can go to another site or go to a Barnes & Noble if they happen to have it in your area. And go to amazon.com/books, type in the title of the book, and scroll down until you see this area. And that's all you need to do. My engineering higher math says that 5 stars is better than 1. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have a chance to talk about the Armageddon Secret. The Kirkus Reviews, that it's called the Michelin Guide to Restaurants, but for books. They gave me an excellent review, and this book was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize at the end of 2022. And they said about the book, Burnham's bracing story hits the ground running, and the pace rarely lets up. An exhilarating war tale that will please genre fans and history buffs alike. If you take a look at on the Amazon website, you'll see about 50 or 55 other quotes like that, including the excellent one from Richard Rose endorsing the book. And I hope that you'll take a look at the website, as you can see over here, www.thearmageddonsecret.com. So again, thank you very much for your time and for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Very good. Thank you for that presentation. That's an excellent book. As I've said, I've enjoyed it, and I hope people will take you up on it and take a look at it. Keith, you have any questions for him?
Yeah, from so you wrote a nonfiction book first,
Yeah,
and then you decided it was a little maybe it's kind of the same thing that had been done before, so you wanted to make it much more engaging and entertaining. So how long did it take you, including writing the nonfiction book, until you actually published?
hate to say it, Keith, but about 20 years.
Well, okay, that's
Yeah.
what I figured, you know. So
Well, I would come home, and I had a stressful job at Ford Motor Company,
mhm.
and I would come home maybe 7 o'clock, 7:30 at night. I eat my dinner, and I would open up my computer, type a little bit, fall asleep.
Yeah,
And then and Saturday morning, if I didn't have to go to work, I would work a little bit more. And then it becomes the next week, and pretty soon, years gone by, not much progress. But once I actually retired from the day-to-day, 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. kind of work, I had then the time to really focus on it. And in the meantime, coming along, I had taken a lot of effort in learning to write properly. Because as a mechanical engineer, you don't have a lot of training in writing fiction. Maybe
yeah,
if I were a lawyer, that'd be more like it, but
sure.
writing fiction.
I understand. You know, it's interesting, and Ray knows this, and you know this. I try to teach my students. I teach, and I try to teach my students. I say, good writers don't write; they rewrite. You know,
Mhm.
Yes,
so
Yeah.
the first draft, don't ever turn that in. You know,
that's right.
so
Yeah, you never stop rewriting. Interestingly, when I was getting toward the end of the manuscript, I printed out all 300. Well, first of all, when I turned in my first editor, it was almost 500 pages,
mhm,
and he said, "No, you can't publish this unless it's around 300." And so he sent back the manuscript. There were huge swaths of the manuscript with big lines drawn through, drop, 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 drop.
mhm.
And so once I factored all that in and I redid it down to about 300 pages with many tears down my cheeks because that was great. I like that
Of
page.
course, of course.
So then I took all the pages, Keith, and I took some special tape, which is from 3M, easy release tape, and I put them all over my room that I work in, and I had the walls papered literally with my manuscript. About 5 or 6 high, and then across and around to that wall, and I would move around, and I would move from one page over to here, and this page over there, and so forth. So I was two-dimensionally re-editing the book that way. So one finds all these different techniques to try to get it right, and then then the editor reads it again, and it's still not right. So,
Well, it's
more
interesting.
revision.
Yeah, I teach video and film production,
Ah,
and one of the things that I always tell my students, and I've been doing this for a year. I've been working with aspiring filmmakers for years and years, and have seen a lot of first and second films. And my advice is, I said, when you get your film edited to where you think it is perfect, go back and cut 40% of it out,
yeah,
because invariably it's
yeah,
going to be too long.
yep.
And they're like, but that's the great part. I said, well, that's just the way it is. It's going to be too long, and you're going to lose things that you love, but it's going to make it much better. And time again, I've had them come back and say, you were right. You were right. It's tighter, it's better, it's more engaging. So yeah, I don't, Ray's written books. I wrote a book, and it's not an easy task, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate coming from where we are in our background and our history and what we love, about the Manhattan Project and Oak Ridge and the history of the world and all that. We do appreciate your efforts and what you've done.
Absolutely.
Sure. So
Sure do. And you've done a lot of research into a very misunderstood area of history, and although you took the approach of fictionalizing it, I think maybe that may make it more real and engaging than just the mere facts, because the mere facts have been cited and they just don't stick with people.
Yeah.
Stories are a much better way to get information transferred than just citing facts.
Absolutely. I agree.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. We want to encourage everyone to go and try to find your book and read it.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate this time to be together, and I look forward to seeing hopefully both of you here in another few weeks.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Be glad to host you in the Oak Ridge.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Ray. Do we have somebody lined up for next time?
We do. We have Rose Weaver going to talk to us. She's an Oak Ridger. She's done a lot of research into the African American history in Oak Ridge, and her latest efforts have to do with the Scarborough 85. Those Black individuals that desegregated the Oak Ridge High School and the Robertsville Junior High in 1955. Robert, it was actually the first desegregation of public school system in the Southeast. And after the Brown versus the Board of Education ruling, it's been little known. I mean, the people that get the credit for these efforts, the Clinton 12, which Keith made a documentary, excellent documentary film about that a few years ago. And now they are recognized. Up until then, it was Little Rock, Arkansas was the only one you heard about. And actually, there was a good bit of effort taking place across the South. Now, we carved out the Southeast because actually there were some schools in Arkansas that desegregated sooner than we did in Oak Ridge. But Oak Ridge was the first one in the South proper, east of the Mississippi. And of course, has done a lot of work on that. So we're going to bring her on and let her talk about what she's done next time.
All right. Sounds good. All right, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.